3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
There is no other institution that has the ability, uniquely,
without a heritage, every generation starts over.
Ask not
to remind the current regime
what your country.
We, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do.
All action.
to get back in their box and stay there.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
From the Heritage Foundation, this is Heritage Explains.
If you happened to be watching CNN late last night, you might have heard this.
It is now official. CNN projects that Donald Trump has been elected president, defeating Vice President Kamala Harris and making a political comeback unlike any in modern American politics. Now, we can make this projection now because CNN projects that Donald Trump has won Wisconsin.
As of early this morning, Wednesday, November the 6th, Donald J. Trump has won the presidency of the United States of America. There are still several House and Senate races that are up in the air, but conservative policy has won a decisive victory in this cycle. I sat down with Heritage Senior Legal Fellow Hans von Spakovsky to get his take on the events of last night and this morning. Hans von Spakovsky, it is the morning after a historic election. You have been doing media all day yesterday and this morning.
Right.
What are your takeaways?
I actually think there's three things that people should keep in mind that I helped ensure Donald Trump's victory. I mean, the first thing is that, look, there were a lot of election reforms passed in key states like Georgia, which the president won this time. Keep in mind, remember, that was the state where they passed really good reforms like saying, well, if you're going to vote with an absentee ballot, you got to have an ID. That was heavily criticized by Joe Biden and others, saying this was Jim Crow 2.0. But in fact, they had record registration of turnout. But that helped increase the security of the process there. North Carolina now had a voter ID law in place. So we had good reforms that I think improved the integrity of the process. The other thing that happened was the 2020 election, again, also spurred a lot of grassroots groups, conservative grassroots groups, to spring up and get organized. And they put on an unprecedented effort to do two things: recruit people to actually work in the polls, which is great, because if you're actually a poll official, you can make sure the law is followed, right? And nothing is done that shouldn't be done. And they put out huge numbers of poll watchers and observers. Again, unprecedented numbers. And transparency is essential to making sure you have a fair election. The third thing that happened was, I think, in 2020, Republicans, the Republican National Committee, the Trump campaign, they weren't ready for the kind of litigation that was filed by the left. Remember, there were all these efforts, successful efforts by the left prior to the 2020 election, often at the last minute, to say, oh, well, like this rule that says absentee ballots have to be in by election day, we shouldn't apply that. And they had Democratic allies who were election officials who said, you're right. We'll just ignore that state law. That happened in Pennsylvania. And they didn't get to court fast enough to stop that kind of thing from happening. That wasn't the case this time. The RNC really built up its litigation arm. The Trump campaign had lawyers all over the country, and we saw them going to court immediately when things were happening, like four of the biggest counties in Georgia saying, oh, observers during the early voting process? Well, we're not going to allow that, even though the law says you have to. And they were very successful, I think, in fighting back those kind of last-minute attempts to manipulate the rules governing the election.
Were there any results last night that you found particularly surprising?
Well, I have to admit I was concerned about, I think Michigan is probably going to get called for Trump. I was concerned about Michigan because it was one of the states that actually, I think, kind of went backwards. For example, they had a good voter ID law, and it got gutted. I was concerned about Nevada. It looks like Nevada probably will get called for Trump, too. Nevada also kind of went backwards. They switched to a system of mailing an absentee ballot to every single registered voter, even though their registration list is in just terrible, terrible condition. So it was things like that that did worry me, but it looks like Trump was able to overcome that and win an unprecedented mandate from the country.
Can you kind of give us a sense of what, if anything, we might expect to see over the next few days, as the dust kind of settles? What might we expect that process to look like?
Well, if the election were closer, I would expect that the Democrats who love litigation might be filing lawsuits trying to contest the outcome. They could end up being the election deniers this time, but the margins seem big enough that it hopefully won't be worth their time to do that. So, we got to wait. There's still a couple of states that are outstanding, but again, we just need to see what the margin of victory is, and hopefully they won't contest the election by filing what are basically lawsuits that don't have any merit.
At this moment, as of this recording, it's Wednesday morning.
Right.
We, of course, have had the race called for Donald Trump as president, and it would appear at this time that we have a majority, the conservatives have a majority in the Senate.
Right.
The ball is kind of still up in the air for the House and for a few outstanding Senate races. Do we have an idea of when we might know how those came down?
Some of those are really close, and I expect that we may have to have recounts depending on the state. In some states, whether you have a recount or not depends on the percentage, the margin of victory. If it's under half a percentage point, sometimes you get an automatic recount. Sometimes it's 1%. So I don't know. I don't know how quickly it's going to take to do that.
Can you kind of give us a sense at this moment right now? Obviously, Election Day was yesterday. Inauguration Day will be next year. Can you give us a sense of what we can expect out of the Trump campaign over the next couple of weeks and months?
Well, look, it's always tough for a newly elected president to try to put together plans for the gigantic federal government we have. The federal government today has about 2.2 million employees. It's very, very large. And trying to find enough people to staff all the different executive agencies in less than 2 months is very difficult. So I have no doubt that he's already got his transition teams organizing. What they will be doing is basically two things: coming up with a plan for what should be done in each executive agency, whether it's DOD or the Justice Department, and scrambling to find good people who can do two things. One, be part of what they call the landing teams. These are the folks who, the moment the president swears the oath and is the new president, they go to each of the government agencies. And they are met there by, in this case, folks from the Biden administration who will basically hand them the keys, say it's all yours. And they have to run those departments until the president can get his regular people nominated, confirmed if they need to be by the Senate, and actually running the departments. And like I said, finding enough personnel to do that who are good, that's a difficult job. One thing I think people ought to know is, and I'm actually going to write an article about this, is Donald Trump's victory is actually bigger than it appears. And what the reason for that is, but people have forgotten two things. One, 2 years ago, the Census Bureau admitted it had made major errors in its census counts. And in fact, it had undercounted the population in a number of red states like Texas and Florida. And in fact, they should have gotten more congressional seats, which means they get more electoral college votes. And the other thing is, again, unfortunately, apportionment is still based on total population. Well, that includes aliens who are in the country, including illegal aliens. If apportionment was based on citizen population, as it should be, that, of course, affects how many electoral college votes you have. And again, the electoral college votes that Trump would have gotten would have been higher because places like California, which have huge numbers of illegal aliens, would lose anywhere from 4 to 6 electoral college votes.
Wow. Hans von Spakovsky, thank you so much.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Thank you to Hans von Spakovsky for his contribution to today's episode. You can follow Hans's work at heritage.org or follow him on X at @HVonSpakovsky. And of course, thanks as always to you for listening to Heritage Explains. You can reach out to us with thoughts, questions, or suggestions at heritageexplains@heritage.org. Take care. We'll see you next time.
Heritage Explains is written and produced by Mark Gagne, Lauren Evans, and John Pop.